auction room today. We are coming back later on in the programme. Don't go away. There could be one or two big surprises. I love auction rooms because you get hands-on with history. Items that are 200 or 300 years old are still sought after and relevant today. That's really encouraging. But it's not always the case with historic buildings, as I found out. There's a Grade 1 listed building not far from here, which is struggling to remain relevant to the town that built it. Take a look at this. Halifax, a good northern market town with a tradition of working hard. Few pretensions. You know what you're getting in Halifax. Or so I thought. Because here, in the centre of town, is Peace Hall. It's the only complete survivor of the great 18th century northern cloth halls. Built in 1779, the architecture is inspired by Imperial Rome. It's splendid. It's full of romance and mad ambition. You could say it's like a little piece of Italy, even if the weather isn't quite up to scratch. The elegant courtyard and galleried walkways seem somewhat out of place here in West Yorkshire. An unlikely match almost, but Halifax and Peace Hall were initially very well suited. Their union has lasted over 230 years, but now, sadly, the relationship is in jeopardy. The local people here are struggling to find a meaningful use for this building in the 21st century. Okay, there are a few shops dotted around and there's a stage down there for entertainment performances, but it doesn't really have any clear purpose. The Peace Hall ought to be one of the major attractions in England, yet even here in Yorkshire somehow I get the feeling that it's in danger of being taken for granted. But before we decide its future, it's worth understanding its past. The common bond that linked the town and the hall was cloth, as Fran Wills from the Bankfield Museum explains.
What Halifax and Colesdale benefited from was that we had all the right raw materials in place to make really good quality cloth. So we had the water, which was really important to the process. We had workers up the valley who were looking for diversification, so we had all the individual weavers, and they were producing this fantastic quality cloth called kersey.
What is so special about the quality?
Kersey is a very hard-wearing fabric, particularly popular with the British Army and other armies at that time.
Uniforms.
For uniforms. Exactly what you need to do, something that's going to be very hard-wearing and do everything that you needed it to do.
And a mass order.
And a mass order.
So it was the success of the cloth, the money that it brought in, that encouraged the merchants to build what we have today, Peace Hall. All of this.
Yes, I mean, they could see, I mean, obviously, Halifax and Colesdale people, to make the most of all business opportunities that they can, they wanted a statement piece, and that's what you have in the Peace Hall. It's a statement piece of architecture saying, we're here, we're at the top of our game, we're producing the very best, and it's encompassed just in the whole architecture of the Peace Hall itself, I think.
The exterior of the building was plain for security reasons, to protect the valuable cloth within. But once you got through these big heavy doors, this gateway, through this grand entrance, well, it must have been love at first sight. Despite its Italian influence, it was a local man who designed Peace Hall. Thomas Bradley was just 22 years old when construction began. It took 4 years to complete. And oh boy, was it worth it. Bradley had several challenges to overcome. One of the main ones being a sloping plot of land, which you can see as we're walking down right now. But he dealt with that quite cleverly by designing 2 floors at the top end there. Look, 1, 2, and at the lower end, at the bottom, 3 floors. Genius. And on the top floor you've got this wonderful colonnade of Tuscan columns which look so rich. The middle floor supported by square chamfered columns, and on the lower ground floor you've got these wonderful big solid square plinths holding up a repetitive form of Tuscan arches. To superb. But beauty doesn't come cheap. The building work cost almost £10,000, astronomical at the time. It was mostly paid for by the manufacturers renting 12 by 7 foot rooms to sell their cloth from. But considering its architectural extravagance, its trading times were frugal, as local heritage guide David Northcliffe told me.
This hall, surprisingly as it seems, only opened 2 hours a week on Saturday morning.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
just
they wanted to concentrate the trade into that period of time so that it was worth the merchants coming, because they knew there'd be plenty of cloth to go at. It was worth the producers, who were individual people from the hills, coming in at that time, because they knew there'd be plenty of merchants to deal with. It was hectic, frantic during that period, as people were looking and buying and feeling and sampling and arguing. And then at 12 o'clock, the bell over the Westgate door rang. End of story. No more trading. That was it for a week. And it worked.
The honeymoon period lasted for 35 years, but then, without warning, something new started to turn the heads of the local men. Mechanisation. By the third decade of the 19th century, trade was increasingly centred at the larger mills, rather than through the small individual tradesmen. Industrialisation meant that by 1830, less than 200 of the 350 rooms available here were occupied. For the next 50 years, the hall managed to survive by marketing itself as a focal point for entertainment to the broader population. Things like balloon rides took place here, horse fairs. It was even frequented by internationally famous tightrope walkers doing their act. But in 1867, the Peace Hall could no longer pay its way, and it was given to Halifax Corporation as a gift.
It had a new role as the wholesale fruit and vegetable market for not just Halifax but the area around. Temporary buildings were put up in the middle here and up against the walls, and so from the 1870s to the 1960s it flourished.
So the place was still really bustling, but I would imagine some of the grandeur would have been lost.
Well, it had, because the place was cluttered, frankly. It no longer looked like the impressive building it deserved to be.
When did it start to go wrong?
It started when changes in retailing, like the advent of supermarkets, came on the scene. It was also the fact that all these operations started to be more concentrating on mechanical handling rather than gangs of men lifting bags and bales about. So this was no longer suitable. Wholesale boys moved out.
By the 1960s, the situation had reached a crisis point. Nobody knew what to do with the grand but seemingly redundant Peace Hall. Now, even though it was a Grade 1 listed building, there were suggestions this should be turned into an open-air swimming pool or even converted into houses for old soldiers. In the 1970s, there were plans afoot to demolish this and turn it into a big car park. But luckily, once again, the hall's fortunes changed. The Peace Hall was refurbished and reopened to the public in 1976. Since then, it's hosted entertainment events, specialist shops have opened, and there is even an art gallery. How do you think the people of Halifax see the Peace Hall today?
I think everybody finds it to be a great building, a worthwhile thing to have, an interesting feature in Halifax. But why should they come here? The shops here are small and they're specialists, so it is short of people coming through, and that's one of the things that's got to be addressed.
Plans afoot?
It needs some development work doing on it, that's for sure, whilst keeping the character, and that's equally important. There's a scheme afoot at the moment to apply for a grant from national sources to do things with it, and that could make it more useful for big events in the centre here, and this might well become the equivalent of a town square.
Exactly, it's got the potential.
Sure.
It really does have. The council have submitted an application to the Heritage Lottery Fund for £7 million to go towards transforming the Peace Hall, possibly into something like this. Well, I certainly hope they find a way to return the hall to its former vitality. Because I, for one, think this splendid building should be at the heart of Halifax life once again. Welcome back to our valuation day venue, the Victoria Hall in Saltaire. Now let's catch up with our experts and see what other treasures we can find.
Andy, thank you so much for bringing in this absolutely marvellous